Peter Davern, the CEO of Turner, was very supportive. But I was debating whether to create a 501c3, a nonprofit, or join with one of the nonprofits that were out there. There were nonprofits popping up everywhere that were helping veterans. One of the big ones was Wounded Warriors. And I was really intrigued with Wounded Warriors because their basic intention of helping veterans make the transition to back to being a civilian was a great one. I could have merged into them or joined them in some way or gotten them to be a contributor. But the minute you did that, they wanted to control your agenda. And my agenda was taking vets and getting them on a track where their brain was working good again and they could go out and function in life. And that really didn't apply to anything. And I didn't want to have a lot of experts tell me how to do that. Because Jack Farley and I were learning how to do that just by being in the hospital 3 times a week.
Well, Bob, do you remember though? For a while, we did get funding just for the meals. Remember?
That's just where
So,
I was going to
yeah.
go. We became very good friends with 2 sisters, twins of a badly wounded Marine named Bunce. The Bunce sisters were working with Wounded Warriors. And what they did was they would participate with us at our luncheons, and they would support us by helping contribute to the luncheons that we had for the vets. We did it on a monthly basis, and that was a big help.
It became part of their outreach too. So we let them do some marketing about Wounded Warrior Project at the lunch, and then they would send a representative out. Yeah.
Wearing a Wounded Warrior jacket because I did some advertising for them. They were a great group at the working level. And then they brought in an Army general retired. And this was about 10 years ago and did a great job. And they're really a first-class operation. But we had great luck working with them and getting support on a very low level. Our goal was to help vets, and we really didn't care what happened to us. As long as we could buy 10 boxes of pizza and bring it in once a month, we were happy. And if Pat Horan couldn't talk, but he could eat a slice of pizza, we were happy. And Pat Horan, in his own way, has become a great example of success, where 20 years ago, Patty never would have known how to spell the word entrepreneur. And it worked. Pat's success with entrepreneurship is he got involved in dealing with epilepsy, which is a side result of the traumatic brain injury he has. And he actually has little segments of podcasts that deal with epilepsy treatment and cure that he puts on Facebook. Pat does this and does a great job. Our goal in this process was to get vets to think outside the box. When they're first a patient at Walter Reed of Bethesda and they got their legs blown off, they can't get to the bathroom, they can't put their clothes on, they're convinced they're never going to date again. Their life is completely upside down and inside out. And Patty was a victim of this. And Pat's was even more destroyed. And so we're trying to provide a bridge for them. You look at the way Pat and Patty are living now with a home and the kids and stuff like that. It's incredible. But it takes a lot of pieces to make this work. The military that came to visit the wounded at Walter Reed, admirals and generals, I got to know 3 or 4 commandants who would come in delivering a shopping cart full of Purple Hearts to the wounded. They understood what we were doing. We weren't on an organization chart. We weren't in the books. They understood what we were doing.
I feel like we did have a special niche because we were on the ground with them. We did look for a lot of funding, but our success was more the funding we got from just the private citizen, I think, and a lot of Bob's connections, because we even went to Bob Woodruff Foundation and we did get some funding for them for a while. But they wanted huge numbers, and we were just doing it in the hospital, making true connection on a personal level. And I think we were making a big impact. Couldn't give them the numbers they were looking for. So
I went with Bob Woodruff Foundation in New York to meet with Morgan Stanley. because Morgan Stanley was going to put millions of bucks into this. But I didn't get along with the people running the Bob Woodruff Foundation because they had a much different vision of what we were doing than what we did. We always had a friendship with them.
Oh, yeah.
We kept it at a distance.
It's true because we invited them. Please come see our class. Please come understand what we're doing. And I think that they never really came. And I think there was a little bit of a disconnect too. They saw us on paper, but not exactly the heart of it.
The other one we had to disconnect with was the Red Cross. We did get passes to the facilities, but we avoided coming under their bureaucracy. So if you're a nonprofit helping vets, God bless you. It's a tough road to go to work your way into the system. Jack and I could not have done it if we hadn't been Vietnam veterans in our own right.
True. I agree.
Yeah.
It is hard to reach the community if you haven't lived it in a way.
You would get NFL teams coming in and NBA teams coming in with world-class athletes, and they would walk in a room with the amputees. They couldn't stand it. Some really big names would up and leave. It's a very unusual situation that you're in, where you spend a year talking to Pat Horan and you're really wondering if 10% of what you said got through. 20 years later, he still remembers everything I said. But it was a different environment, and our goal was purely to help a vet get to the next step. You got to help the person recover. And you don't just deal with heroes, the guy that, shot 27 enemy. You got to help everybody. I raised money from Turner Construction. I raised money from ULI. I raised a significant amount of money from guys that I had gone to college with and were fraternity brothers that had been successful in their careers. And I raised money from veterans that I knew from Vietnam. The personal contacts are the key to doing it. And the care you got to pay when you're doing a nonprofit, if you start taking funds from a donor group, they're going to have all sorts of rules of what they want you to do or can't do.
And I also think you have to see if the lemon's worth the squeeze, because there's a lot of reporting that we had to do, and for how much they're willing to fund you, you have to really look at all the work and if you have the manpower to actually continually to do some aggressive reporting throughout the year and obey their rules.
And you will run into bureaucracy. We had a situation where there was an admiral. This was when Walter Reed had some problems, and the press had a field day telling stories. Walter Reed was providing world-class medicine, unmatched anywhere in the world. They had some problems. The press made it sound like the world was ending. So some leadership put energy into limiting visitors. So I wrote some letters and got some emails, and Jack Farley helped me, and we got some people high up in the military system to pay attention, and the problem was resolved within a month or two, and we were back visiting. And what goes on at Walter Reed is magical, the level of medicine and the success rate, and Bethesda.
I just wanted to see if you could talk about when we started the 501c3, every nonprofit has to have a board. So how did you decide who was going on the board, or how did you throw the board?
It was a very small operation. We had 5 board members. It was me. We had the lawyer from Turner. We had Nick Bellotti, because Nick Bellotti ran Turner International.
I think
Chris Santiago, a wounded Marine, on the board. We have since put H.T. Tran on the board. Eventually, we got rid of the Turner lawyer, and my son's on the board because he does all our legal work for 100 Entrepreneurs. And he's also helped a number of vets with starting businesses, and better yet, he didn't charge us anything. Patty's on the board. Nick Bellotti's still on board. And H.T. Tran, a wounded soldier who's been an incredible success as an entrepreneur, starting his own company in San Francisco, and now is back with Turner Construction in Texas. I wanted people on the board, first of all, that I trusted. Secondly, that understood what our objective was. Our objective was not to raise $1 million a year. Our objective was not to be able to stand up in a public function and say, I've got 785 wounded vets in college this year. We didn't deal with any of that because if we help one wounded vet a month change his direction in life, that's huge. And that sticks with him for the rest of his life. That's what we were trying to do. And counting that in numbers, in my opinion, doesn't make any sense. You can't put a dollar value on that. That's why vets are calling me 20 years after they came to a 100 entrepreneur class with questions about doing a business. The help you do really impacts a man or a woman for the rest of their life. And frankly, in my mind, I wouldn't have known what a caregiver was until I met Patty Horan. They pay a price, in some cases, bigger than the vets. They need attention. You know, you got a 20-something-year-old husband that's wounded and needs care 24/7 for the rest of his life. It's those kinds of things that really make a difference. And that's where I think there's opportunities for nonprofits.
Yeah, I think founding a nonprofit is similar to being an entrepreneur. And you were talking earlier about going to some of these large funders. You have to be right-sized. The Bob Woodruff Foundation, something as small as 100 entrepreneurs is almost harder work for them. When I worked for the Carter Center, there were corporations that we went to for funding who said, you don't fit into our corporate giving, but I like what you do. So we get private donations. So balancing the what can you count and measure. And people, they're coming up with creative ways to measure the unmeasurable. And it's less about hard numbers, and you can find proxies for outcomes that you can measure that people are coming around and willing to accept. But some of the funders are under a lot of pressure. I will say that when I worked at the Carter Center mental health program, one of our national meetings was on veterans, and we focused on the National Guard and Reserves because at that time, nobody was paying attention to them. And I will say the number of little tiny nonprofits who were doing good work, there are a gazillion out there. And appropriately so, like you said, you have a veteran come back and who's like, I want to just stay in my community. And that's how a lot of nonprofits spring up organically because there's a need.
I'm glad you brought that up, Lee, because every one of them has the same overhead. That's the challenge that's out there.
Yeah, you can join Blue Star or whatever, but the good news is somebody is helping you. The bad news is people usually have their own ways of doing things.
There's got to be 3,000 of these nonprofits out there. That's why 100 Entrepreneurs is so important in what it does. If we get 10 people look at this video in the course of the next year, and several of them go do something with a nonprofit, that's a gigantic home run. We've had, I'll bet, 50 get into bakery businesses, making donuts or cakes or something like that they want to do. And people with brain injury and stuff like that, unbelievable.
Are there any key things that you would tell somebody who's interested in starting a business or a nonprofit or just even looking for a new direction in terms of just how to get going with that?
Just go do it. Jump in the goddamn water and get wet. I've been fired from Turner when I was 56. I was rehired as a consultant. I still do consulting for them, but go do it. I had no knowledge whatsoever of medicine, of what goes on in a hospital. I could barely spell half the words. Just go do it. Jump in and do it. And always be nice. Don't ever ask for permission. Do it and be ready to apologize.